Let's talk about the relationship between value and price. I gave a video the other day talking about how giving value comes with certain obligations, and those obligations are to give value at scale. That refers to basically giving as much value as possible to as many people as possible. After that video, I received a question or comment from someone talking about, how they struggle to put a price on the value that they have to give. Now, this is someone who, they give a lot of knowledge, they give a lot of information, they consult, they advise people and so on, they mentor in some instances. And it begs the question, from that conversation comes the question to say, how do I put a price on the value that I have to give? And that's the relationship between price and value that we're going to discuss. We're going to discuss the relationship between value and price. I'm going to discuss a few points, about 4 or 5 points, and hopefully they'll give some guidance in how we put a price on the things that we value. And you and I as consumers, we can view it from that point of view to say we pay for things, we buy things, we spend money on things. And there are things or there are factors that inform our willingness to pay for those things or to give money in exchange for those things. And so we want to discuss the relationship between value and price. There are a few things to note. The first is the fact that people pay for what they value, right? So you and I, if you think about the things that we've ever spent money on, it's because we had a certain value that we derived out of the thing that we paid for, whether it served a need, a want, or a desire, it filled a gap, and so on. We pay for what we value. And so when you look at anything that has ever been paid for, when you look at the price that you put on something, that price is informed by the value that is in the thing that is up for sale, right? So that the price is informed by the value because people pay for what they're willing or what they value, People pay for what they value. That's the first thing to consider. The second thing to consider is the fact that how much people are willing to pay is informed by how much value they perceive in that thing, right? So the greater the value or the greater the perception of value is the more people are willing to pay, right? The greater the value, right, or the greater the perception of value in the eyes of you and I as consumers, is the more we're willing to pay for that thing, such that if we think that something is more valuable or contains more value, we're willing to pay more for it. So this can be informed by various things, whether it's quality, whether it's, longevity, whether it's aesthetics, that it's more beautiful or whatnot and whatnot. The greater the value we perceive in the thing, the more we're willing to pay for it. This is such that if we had two things that we're comparing and that these things they're the same item, but they cost different amounts. So we might have two jackets, for example, and one jacket might be an X amount, and another jacket might be 10X amount, right? 10 times the price of the other. They are both jackets. They both fulfill the human desire for warmth, but the jacket that costs more might have a greater perception of value because maybe it's a certain brand, maybe it's a certain style, maybe there's a certain sentimental value to it, maybe it's a limited edition, it's an exclusive, maybe it's a jacket that was owned by a famous person and is only one of its kind. Because of the increase in the perception of value, one is willing to pay more for that item and they're willing to pay a higher price for it because of the idea that the greater the perception of value or the greater the value, the more is someone willing to pay for it. Such that if you can increase the perceived value of a thing in a person's eyes, you can then increase how much you charge that person because of the fact that there is more to it that they believe they're getting out of that thing. The more the perception of the value is, the more one is willing to pay. The third point to note from that is the fact that this perception of value, right, how we perceive something to be of value, is drawn from our various inherent wants and needs, right? So our perceptions are informed by our wants and our needs. What do I mean by that? Maybe by an example. I have a friend of mine who he could care less about, brands and, fashion labels and so on. He's a very basic and simple gentleman. He wears, whatever he thinks looks good on him. And that's his main criteria for, when he buys clothes. But he could care less so much about brand, whether it's this and this brand, whether it's this and this, label and so on. And so for him, he doesn't have that innate need for brand recognition or brand alignment. And so he would not necessarily have an inkling to want to pay more for something just because it's tied to a particular brand, because it's not tied to his deep needs and wants. Because of that, there is no pull to want to pay more on the perception of, on the basis of, brand, or, because of the fact that that's not tied to his inherent need. But if you were to argue on the idea of quality, of longevity, of, aesthetic, then he'd be willing to pay more for it because it'll last longer, it'll help him function better, and so on. So his deep needs inform what he perceives to be valuable or not valuable. And so if you think about the people that you are giving value to, the people that you're serving, the people that you really want to work with and for, their perceived needs and wants shape their perceptions of whether something is valuable. The deep needs, wants, and longings that they have, inform whether they see something to be valuable or not. So if you think about, a certain clientele who might be in a higher, income bracket and whatnot, they have certain needs, and then someone who might have, who might be in another income bracket, their needs might differ, their immediate needs might differ. So whereas someone's immediate need might just be, to be clothed, to be covered, to be protected from the elements, another person's need might just be to look good, to have a certain brand, and so on. Their deep fundamental needs in that moment shape their value. So that whereas one person just wants something that will cover his body and so on, another person wants something that will show them off, that will make them look, distinct in public, and so on. Our deep needs inform our perceptions. The interesting thing to note about that is the fact that that perception of value does not come from the inherent value of the thing that's up for sale. What do I mean by that? There are certain brands that sell a particular bag or various range of bags that can be sold by another brand for much cheaper because of the fact that they are not that brand, right? So I shudder to name names, but if you think about, certain top line, high line brands, they price things at a much higher price, not because that's the actual cost of the material or that's actually how much it costs to make and deliver, but because of the brand value. So most successful brands, most very high-end, expensive brands understand that the true pricing of a thing is not in the inherent value. It's not in the material or in the substance of the thing, but in the perception of the thing. So that you're willing to pay more for the thing, not because the material is made out of gold and diamonds and all of these things, but because there is a perception that comes from the brand or the identity or the inherent need that it meets, right? And so realizing that our great needs that inform value come from our perceptions of value, come from our deep needs. Most successful or high-paying brands realize that it's not so much about the inherent material, but it's about the perception of value, right? The perception of value informed by the deep needs, longings, and wants, right? How some people put a price on things, if I digress a bit, they look at, okay, it costs me X rand to produce this thing, it costs me X plus 1 to then deliver the thing, and so that's the actual cost of production. I'm just going to put a 10% margin or a 50% margin or a 100% margin, and that's going to be my price. And that's how most people price, especially physical products. But there are certain things which, even though they might not cost so much in their material, have significant value because of the results that they provide for people. So, for example, you might think of a certain textbook. The paper that produces the textbook might cost a certain amount of money, but the value that the textbook provides and the knowledge that it gives is so significant that one can charge 2, 3, 5, 10 times more than the material of the thing because of the value that a person extracts from that thing. So value is based on the perception that a person has out of their deep wants and needs, right? And that's the fourth point to consider if I were to recap all of them. Number one is that people pay for what they value. Number two, the greater the value, the greater people are willing to pay. So if you increase the value, you can increase the price. And this value comes from what people perceive of that value, right? It's how much people perceive the thing to be valuable. And this perception comes from deep wants and needs. So if something doesn't necessarily meet a deep want or a need of the person you're dealing with, they might not see the value of the thing, despite how much you might, put a price on it. And the fourth is the fact that if you can increase the perception, you can increase the price. So going back to the gentleman who asked the question, if you were to think about the things that he's producing and the person for whom he is producing it for, the question to then ask is, how valuable is this thing to this person, right? What results can it give for them? How big is the problem that it's solving for them? How deep is the need that it's meeting for them? And then that can inform the price that they're willing to pay to solve that problem or to meet that need. If you were to put yourself in the shoes of the people you're giving value to, whether it's in the area of giving a service, whether it's in the area of creating a product, whether it's in the area of sharing knowledge, whether it's in the area of whatever value that you have to give, think about the great problem that you're solving for that person and how much the value you're giving meets that need. And that can inform the price that they're willing to pay to have that need met. The area of value creation, the area of sharing the knowledge and information, there is a need that we can give, that we can solve, and that informs the value to the person. That informs what they're willing to pay for. Thoughts were a bit jumbled, but hopefully it gets the point across in the relationship between value and price. And if you think about it from the perspective of you and I as consumers, that's where I'm coming from in sharing this, is the fact that we buy things on a day-to-day basis. We pay for things that we're willing to pay for. And there are certain things that we're willing to pay more for. Right? There are certain things that we're willing to give more money for. And that's because of the fact that we perceive them to be of greater value. And that comes from the relationship between value and price. Let me know what you think. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts, and let's catch each other on the other side.